Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes, home to some of the friendliest people in America. A place where winter lasts 8 months and people still smile about it. But here's the thing. Not every corner of this state is quite as welcoming as the tourism brochures would have you believe. Some cities and towns are dealing with challenges that make even the hardiest Minnesotans think twice before settling down. These are 10 places in Minnesota nobody wants to live in. Number 10. Waite Park. Population of about 7,700 people, and a crime rate that'll make you double-check your locks. Waite Park sits just outside St. Cloud in central Minnesota, and it's earned itself the unfortunate distinction of having one of the highest property crime rates in the entire state. We're talking about 73.77 crimes per 1,000 residents according to recent data. That's not a typo. The numbers tell a stark story. Nearly 7,000 property crimes per 100,000 residents. Theft, burglary, car break-ins. For a small city, that's astronomically high. Your chances of being a victim of property crime here are significantly higher than almost anywhere else in Minnesota. It's the kind of place where you don't leave anything in your car, not even loose change, because someone will definitely be checking. The town itself isn't particularly charming to begin with. It's got that suburban sprawl feel without the suburban safety. Strip malls, parking lots, and a general sense that this place grew too fast without anyone stopping to think about infrastructure or community planning. Waite Park developed as a commercial corridor serving the broader St. Cloud area, which means you get all the traffic and activity without the historic charm or established neighborhoods that make a place feel like home. Add the crime problem on top of that, and you've got a recipe for a place most people are trying to leave rather than move to. The city struggles with its identity. It's not quite St. Cloud, not quite its own independent community, just sort of wedged in between, dealing with problems from both directions. Local residents will tell you the biggest issue is theft. Package theft, car theft, bikes stolen right off porches. The kind of low-level but constant property crime that wears down a community. Sure, violent crime isn't as prevalent, but when you can't trust that your stuff will be there when you get home, that's its own kind of stress. One Waite Park resident posted online, "I've lived here 3 years and had my car broken into twice, my garage broken into once, and someone stole my kids' bikes right off our front lawn in broad daylight. We're moving." That sentiment is common. The city has tried various crime prevention initiatives, but with limited resources and a transient population, nothing seems to stick. It's become a place where people live temporarily rather than building roots, and that lack of investment in community only makes the problems worse. Number 9, Roseville. Now here's one that might surprise you. Roseville, population around 36,000, is a suburb of the Twin Cities. It's got shopping, restaurants, decent access to Minneapolis and St. Paul. On paper, it should be a perfectly fine place to live. In reality, it's dealing with a significant property crime problem that has residents on edge. The crime rate sits at about 60 crimes per 1,000 people. Again, we're looking primarily at property crime. Theft and burglary are the big issues here. The suburb's proximity to major highways makes it an easy target for thieves who can get in and get out quickly. Shopping centers and apartment complexes seem to be particular hotspots. What makes Roseville frustrating for residents is that it feels like it should be safe. It's not some rough urban core or economically depressed small town. It's a middle-class suburb with good schools and parks. But the theft rate is stubborn, and it's been that way for years. One resident put it this way, "I thought moving to the suburbs meant not worrying about my car getting broken into. I was wrong." The city has tried various approaches to combat the problem, from increased police patrols to community watch programs, but the numbers haven't budged much. When your suburban sanctuary comes with a side of constant property crime, that shine wears off pretty quickly. Number 8, West St. Paul. Don't confuse this with St. Paul proper. West St. Paul is its own city in Dakota County, part of the greater Twin Cities area, with about 20,000 residents. And it's got problems that extend beyond just the West in its name. The violent crime rate here is roughly 40% above state levels. Property crime is similarly elevated, with residents having about a 1 in 44 chance of being a victim. But there's one statistic that really stands out. The rape statistics in West St. Paul are more than 50% higher than the national average. That's not just concerning, that's alarming. The city has a somewhat industrial feel, known historically for its meatpacking industry. It's blue-collar, working class, and struggling with the kinds of social problems that tend to plague cities in transition. The crime isn't just numbers on a page here, it's affecting real families trying to make a decent life. Add to that, schools that aren't winning any awards, and a general economic malaise, and you've got a city that people aren't exactly excited to call home. There are pockets of West St. Paul that are perfectly fine, but overall, the trajectory hasn't been great for years. Number 7, Bloomington. Yes, that Bloomington, home to the Mall of America. Population around 85,000. You'd think a city with one of the world's largest shopping and entertainment complexes would have its act together? Well, crime doesn't care about tourist attractions. Bloomington reports about 42 crimes per 1,000 residents. The mall itself is obviously a massive draw for shoplifting and theft. But it's not just the mall. Throughout the city, theft incidents are common, and there are occasional violent crimes that make headlines. The sheer volume of people flowing through Bloomington daily, between the mall, the airport nearby, and everything else, creates opportunities for criminals. Living in Bloomington means dealing with traffic, congestion, and the reality that your neighborhood is adjacent to what's essentially a small city within a city. The Mall of America employs thousands and attracts millions of visitors annually. That's great for the economy, less great for residents dealing with the spillover effects. It's not the worst place on this list by any means, but for a city that should theoretically have the resources to keep things under control, the crime numbers are higher than they should be. Residents in certain neighborhoods report feeling like they're living in a transit zone rather than a settled community. Number 6, St. Cloud. St. Cloud has a long and unfortunate history of appearing on worst places to live lists. The Wall Street Journal even called it out years ago, and sadly, things haven't improved as much as city leaders hoped. Population around 68,000, and a crime rate that's 104% above the national average. For a city this size, those numbers should be embarrassing. The poverty rate exceeds both state and national levels. But it's the specific nature of the crime that's particularly troubling. The rape rate in St. Cloud is staggeringly high. We're talking significantly elevated compared to both Minnesota and national averages. This isn't something you can brush aside or explain away with demographic quirks. It's a serious public safety issue that affects real people. Theft rates are roughly 2.5 times the national rate. Burglary stats aren't much better. You've got about a 1 in 24 chance of being a victim of property crime in St. Cloud. Those are not comforting odds. Walk through certain neighborhoods and you'll see windows with bars, multiple locks on doors, security cameras everywhere. People have adapted to living in a higher crime environment, but that adaptation comes at a cost to quality of life. The city has struggled with these issues for years, and despite various initiatives and programs, the needle hasn't moved enough to make people feel safe. City officials point to economic factors, drug problems, and social service gaps. Those are all real issues, but residents want solutions, not explanations. St. Cloud also has some of the economic challenges that plague smaller Minnesota cities. Jobs are available, but not always well-paying ones. Manufacturing has declined. Retail jobs don't pay enough to support families. The gap between what people need to earn and what jobs actually pay creates stress and instability. The city has a large student population from St. Cloud State University, which should theoretically bring vibrancy and economic activity. Universities usually boost local economies, right? But in St. Cloud, the student population seems somewhat disconnected from the broader community. They live in certain neighborhoods, spend money in certain areas, and then leave after graduation. The economic benefit is real but limited. Residents describe a city that feels stuck, not small enough to have that tight-knit community feel where everybody knows everybody and looks out for each other. Not big enough to have the resources, opportunities, and amenities of a major metro area. Just stuck in the middle with crime rates that make even longtime locals think about leaving. One St. Cloud resident of 30 years put it bluntly. "I raised my kids here, but I wouldn't want my grandkids growing up here now. It's not the same city it used to be." That kind of sentiment, long-time residents feeling like their city has changed for the worse, is common and reflects real frustration with the direction things have gone. Number 5. Fridley. About 8 miles from downtown Minneapolis, Fridley should be a convenient suburban option. Population of roughly 30,000, decent location, reasonable housing prices. But Fridley has a crime problem that overshadows everything else. The crime rate is 99% above the national average. Common crimes include theft, burglary, car theft, and robbery. Residents have a 1 in 22 chance of falling victim to crime. Those are some of the worst odds in the metro area. And it's not just the crime. The schools in Fridley are poorly rated, and the poverty rate is higher than surrounding areas. What happened to Fridley? It's a classic case of a suburb that never quite kept up with changing times. The city grew rapidly in the mid-20th century, but as demographics shifted and economic conditions changed, Fridley didn't adapt well. Crime crept in, resources became strained, and a negative cycle began. One resident described it as the place you drive through to get somewhere better. That's harsh, but it captures the sentiment. Fridley isn't a destination. It's not where young professionals are excited to buy their first home. It's where people end up when they can't afford better options. And that reality perpetuates the problems. The city is trying. There have been revitalization efforts, community programs, increased policing. But when your crime rate is nearly double the national average, you've got a long way to climb. Number 4, Brooklyn Center. Population around 30,000, Brooklyn Center sits just outside Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's got a violent crime rate that's 165% higher than the Minnesota average. That translates to about 679 violent crimes per 100,000 people. Property crime is similarly elevated. The area has long been plagued by poverty and unemployment. The average salary is about 11% below the national average, which doesn't sound like much until you factor in Minnesota's relatively high cost of living. Jobs exist, but many are low-wage service positions that don't provide pathways to economic stability. Brooklyn Center made national headlines in 2021 during the police shooting of Daunte Wright, which sparked protests and civil unrest. The incident highlighted long-standing tensions between the community and law enforcement, as well as deeper issues of racial and economic inequality. Crime categories include assault, robbery, and burglary. Gang activity has been reported in some neighborhoods. Residents describe areas where you don't walk alone at night, where certain streets are best avoided, where the sound of sirens is just background noise. The education system is weak, which doesn't help break cycles of poverty. When schools struggle and crime is high, families who can afford to leave generally do. That leaves behind a concentration of people with fewer resources, and the problems compound. Brooklyn Center has pockets of decent neighborhoods, but overall, it's a city struggling with serious challenges that will take years and significant resources to address. Number 3, Red Wing. Red Wing might surprise you. It's a smaller city of around 16,000 people, situated on the Mississippi River in southeastern Minnesota. It's got some beautiful historic architecture, a scenic riverfront, and a tourism industry built around its pottery heritage. So why is it on this list? The crime rate. According to recent analyses, Red Wing has a significant crime problem for a city its size. Both property and violent crimes are elevated compared to state averages. The economic situation isn't great either, with median incomes below state levels and limited job opportunities beyond tourism and a few manufacturing plants. What's particularly frustrating for Red Wing is that it has so much potential. The location is gorgeous, the downtown has charm, but crime and economic stagnation have created a situation where the city can't quite capitalize on its assets. Tourism brings visitors, but doesn't necessarily create stable, year-round jobs for residents. Local residents talk about a city that feels like it's slowly declining. Young people leave for better opportunities in Minneapolis or Rochester. The population is aging. Crime is noticeable enough that it affects quality of life, but not dramatic enough to spark major intervention. Red Wing is the kind of place that looks great in photographs, but reveals its problems the longer you stay. It's a city waiting for something to change, some catalyst to reverse the trend, but so far, that hasn't happened. Number 2, Bemidji. Bemidji has the unfortunate distinction of topping multiple most dangerous cities in Minnesota lists. Population around 15,000, and a crime rate that's 268% above the national average. Let that sink in for a moment. Nearly 3 times the national average. That's not a number you can explain away with statistical quirks or one bad year. Located in northern Minnesota in Beltrami County, Bemidji has a violent crime rate of about 814 per 100,000 people. That's more than 3 times the Minnesota state average. Property crime is equally problematic, with theft and burglary occurring at rates that would shock residents of safer Minnesota communities. Residents have roughly a 1 in 12 chance of being victims of property crime. For violent crime, it's 1 in 123. Those are troubling odds for anywhere, but particularly for a smaller city where you'd expect more community cohesion and safety. The area around Bemidji includes several Native American reservations: Red Lake, White Earth, and Leech Lake. These communities are vastly underserved, with many residents living well below the poverty line. The poverty rate on some of these reservations exceeds 30%, creating conditions that sociologists would call concentrated disadvantage. Lack of economic opportunity, limited access to quality education and healthcare, historical trauma, ongoing discrimination, all of these factors contribute to social problems that spill over into surrounding areas. The relationship between Bemidji and the nearby reservations is complicated. The reservations have their own governance structures and law enforcement, but proximity means problems flow in both directions. Drug trafficking, substance abuse, and associated crimes don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. Violent crimes, theft, drug use, and alcoholism drive most of the crime in the area. The methamphetamine epidemic hit this part of Minnesota particularly hard, and the effects are still reverberating. Opioid abuse is another significant problem. When addiction rates are high, property crime inevitably follows as people seek money to support their habits. Unemployment in Bemidji is far above the state average. The city's economy historically relied on timber and paper production, but those industries have declined. Tourism provides some jobs. Bemidji is known for the Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox statues, and it's positioned as a gateway to Minnesota's lake country. But tourism jobs are often seasonal and low wage, providing little economic stability. Median income levels are low, well below both state and national averages. The combination of high unemployment, low wages, and limited opportunity creates a challenging environment for everyone living there. Young people leave for college or jobs elsewhere and often don't come back. The brain drain is real and ongoing. Bemidji State University is located here, which should bring some economic and cultural benefits. The university employs people, brings students who spend money, and theoretically creates a more educated workforce. But the university population somewhat exists in its own bubble, separate from many of the city's struggles. Campus life and downtown Bemidji life are 2 different worlds. Law enforcement is stretched thin. The Bemidji Police Department doesn't have the resources of a larger city, but they're dealing with crime rates that would challenge departments twice their size. Response times can be slow, particularly in areas outside the core downtown. Preventive policing, the kind where officers build relationships with communities and address problems before they escalate, is difficult when you're constantly responding to calls. Residents describe a city where crime is just accepted as part of life, which is a depressing reality for a community trying to function. People know which streets to avoid. They know not to walk alone after dark in certain areas. They've adapted their behavior to accommodate the crime problem, but that adaptation represents a diminished quality of life. Bemidji has good people working hard to make things better. Community organizations, churches, nonprofits, individual residents who refuse to give up on their city, they're all putting in effort. But the challenges are deep-rooted and systemic, requiring far more resources and time than currently available. Without significant investment in economic development, social services, addiction treatment, and law enforcement, the problems will persist. Number 1. Minneapolis. Here we are, the big one. Minnesota's largest city, population over 420,000, and the most dangerous city in the state. Minneapolis has a violent crime rate of 1,160 per 100,000 people. That's 352% higher than the Minnesota average. For Minnesota's flagship city, its cultural and economic center, these numbers represent a serious problem. The numbers are stark and getting worse in some categories. In 2024, Minneapolis recorded 76 homicides, up from 72 in 2023, and significantly higher than the 48 recorded in 2019. That's a concerning upward trend, even as many other major cities across America saw decreases. We're not talking about a one-year statistical blip. This is a sustained pattern showing the city moving in the wrong direction on one of the most important safety metrics. The assault rate sits at about 681 per 100,000 people. Robbery is at 372. Rape cases numbered 89 per 100,000. These aren't small-town numbers accidentally inflated by a single incident. This is thousands of crimes happening across the city every year, affecting real people, real families, real neighborhoods. Property crime is similarly problematic. Minneapolis had the highest burglary rate in Minnesota. Car thefts are common enough that residents just expect it. If you own a Kia or Hyundai, you're basically guaranteed to have someone try to steal it at some point. Package theft is practically a given if you have deliveries left on your porch. Many residents have resorted to getting post office boxes or having packages delivered to their workplaces because they know front porch delivery means it'll be gone within hours. What happened? How did Minnesota's showcase city end up in this position? The answer is complicated and politically charged, but certain factors are undeniable. The death of George Floyd in May 2020 and the subsequent protests and civil unrest created a massive upheaval in the city. The police station in the 3rd Precinct was burned. Parts of the city saw riots and looting. The trauma was real and affected everyone, though different communities experienced it very differently. In the aftermath, the Minneapolis Police Department shrank dramatically, down 34% since 2018 to just 585 sworn officers as of mid-2023. Some officers retired early, others left for jobs in suburban departments or different careers entirely. Recruitment became extremely difficult as fewer people wanted to be cops in a city where police work had become intensely scrutinized and often thankless. 585 officers is nowhere near enough to adequately police a city of over 420,000 people. That's roughly 1.4 officers per 1,000 residents, well below recommended ratios. Response times increased. Areas with lower call volumes got less attention. Criminals noticed the gap and took advantage. The department has tried to rebuild, offering signing bonuses up to $20,000 and opportunities for paid college education. But reputation damage and political uncertainty have made recruitment slow. Many experienced officers are gone, replaced by rookies who are still learning. That loss of institutional knowledge and experience matters. But it's not just about police numbers. Minneapolis has deep issues with housing insecurity that predate 2020 by decades. Housing costs have skyrocketed while wages haven't kept pace. People are one financial emergency away from homelessness. When housing instability is high, crime tends to follow. Economic inequality in Minneapolis is stark. The city has wealthy neighborhoods with million-dollar homes and booming property values right next to areas with concentrated poverty. That juxtaposition creates tension and resentment. Some parts of the city are thriving economically, while others are being left behind. Social services can't keep up with demand. Mental health resources are stretched thin. Addiction treatment has long wait lists. Homeless shelters are full. When people in crisis can't get help, they often end up in the criminal justice system instead, which isn't designed to address underlying issues. Poverty rates are high in certain neighborhoods, particularly North Minneapolis and Phillips. These areas have struggled for generations with disinvestment, discriminatory housing policies, and limited economic opportunities. Gang activity persists in some neighborhoods, often driven by young people who see few legitimate paths to success. Drug problems continue, particularly methamphetamine and fentanyl. The opioid epidemic has hit Minneapolis hard. Overdoses are common. Drug dealing happens openly in some areas. The associated property crime, people stealing to support addictions, adds to the overall crime problem. The city has safe neighborhoods, which is important to note. Southwest Minneapolis, around Lake Harriet and Lake Calhoun, now Baie-des-Maquisards, is generally very safe. Uptown, despite some recent issues, is still relatively secure. Many neighborhoods in South Minneapolis are perfectly fine. The University of Minnesota campus area has its own police force and maintains decent safety levels. Downtown Minneapolis during the day is actually relatively safe. Business hours, with people moving around, restaurants and shops open, it's fine. But at night, things change. Empty streets, fewer witnesses, more opportunities for crime. Even downtown workers who used to grab dinner after work or see a show now tend to head home earlier. North Minneapolis tells a different story. Parts of this area have been struggling for decades, but recently things have gotten worse. Gunshots are common enough that residents barely react. One North Minneapolis mother said, "I don't let my kids play outside after 4 p.m. anymore. It's just not safe." We've had 3 shootings on our block in the last year. The Phillips neighborhood, southeast of downtown, has significant drug activity and property crime. Broadway Avenue and areas around there have been hotspots for violence. Police presence is higher, but it hasn't been enough to fundamentally change the situation. What's particularly challenging is that Minneapolis should have the resources to fix these problems. It's a major city with Fortune 500 companies headquartered downtown: Target, US Bank, Ameriprise Financial. The economy is diverse and strong in many sectors. Major healthcare systems employ thousands. The University of Minnesota adds both economic activity and educated workers. The infrastructure and resources exist. Cultural institutions are thriving: the Walker Arts Center, the Guthrie Theater, First Avenue Music Venue, extensive parks and lakes. People want to live here for good reasons. But quality of life takes a hit when you're worried about safety. Political will, effective policy implementation, and community trust all need to align to address crime, and they haven't yet. City council debates about police funding have been contentious. Some residents want more police, others want different approaches to public safety. Finding consensus has been difficult. Residents describe a city in transition, caught between what it was and what it might become. Some neighborhoods are gentrifying rapidly: coffee shops opening, property values rising, young professionals moving in. Others are experiencing disinvestment, businesses closing, property values stagnant or declining, long-time residents leaving. The contrast is stark and uncomfortable. One Minneapolis resident summed it up this way: "I love this city, I really do. The arts, the food scene, the lakes, the bike paths, the diversity, the energy. But I'm tired of worrying every single time I park my car, whether it'll still be there when I get back. I'm tired of hearing gunshots at night and wondering if this is the night a stray bullet comes through my window. I'm tired of feeling like my neighborhood is getting worse instead of better, and nobody in charge seems to have real answers." That's the reality of Minneapolis in 2025. Still a great city in many ways. Still culturally vibrant, still economically important, still beautiful with its lakes and parks, but struggling with crime and safety issues serious enough that many people, both current residents and potential newcomers, seriously question whether they want to call it home. The crime statistics aren't just numbers. They represent diminished quality of life for hundreds of thousands of people who deserve better. So there you have it. 10 places in Minnesota where the Minnesota nice reputation takes a beating. From Waite Park's property crime to Minneapolis's comprehensive safety challenges, these cities share common threads. Crime rates exceeding state and national averages, economic struggles, and communities working to reverse negative trends. Even the worst places in Minnesota are often safer than many cities in other states. Minnesota overall ranks as one of the safer states. But that's cold comfort if you're living in one of these communities dealing with daily crime concerns. These rankings aren't meant to shame residents. Plenty of good people call these cities home, working hard to improve their communities. But statistics don't lie, and potential residents deserve honest information. If you found this helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos about places across America. Have you lived in any of these Minnesota cities? Share your experience in the comments, and if you're considering Minnesota, research carefully before choosing your destination. Thanks for watching.